Hey, what's up everyone? I got a new weapon light to show you that has some features that I just can't find anywhere else. Today we'll be looking at the brand new Olight Baldr Pro R. And this is pretty cool because it fits that same form factor as like the Surefire x300, but then has a ton more features. I'll show you all. Let's get started. So the Baldr Pro R is actually the new upgraded version to the Baldr Pro that I reviewed for you all previously. And Olight must be listening to some of my criticism because they removed a lot of the things that were the cons in that Baldr Pro video. Which is nice to see because I think this is going to be a much better overall light. Olight also does a lot of flash sales you should watch out for where you can save a whole ton of cash too. And I tend to have perfect timing if you're paying attention. But I'll put a link down in the description if you're interested in purchasing this light. Just make sure to use discount code TLDCO so you can save yourself a few bucks. But let's tear into this light and see what's different in the R specifically. Oh, good Lord, the Lockout Mode. When this light ships, they send it in the Lockout Mode. So it won't swap modes or turn to anything different besides the low power mode. So no, your light isn't broken, but probably like me, you don't ever really read the instructions. What you need to do is hold down both buttons on the side for 2 seconds, and the light then goes into the full function mode. I'll mention it again as I'm sure somebody's gonna miss it. But as I said, let's tear into this light and we'll see what all comes with it, go over the Baldr Pro R housing, and show any differences to the original Baldr Pro. Then we'll show the different functions of the light, test some various holster sizes and fit. Then we'll take it out at night and compare the light to a few different other weapon mounted lights we have. And then we'll finish with some pros, cons, and if I recommend it. Whew, that's a lot. All right, well, let's turn into it. Starting with the box first, here's the packaging the Olight Baldr Pro R comes in. Is there anything else on the side? No. All right, well, let's just open this up. Opening the package, we see this nice little touch that Olight always puts in here with a note to their customers. Lifting this up, we see all the included instructions and accessories. First, we have the magnetic charging cable that Olight uses on all their products. And this is making me think that the R in the Baldr Pro R means rechargeable. And that would be nice to see because that was one of the main complaints I had with the Baldr Pro. But let's keep going and let's find out. Also included in the package is the instruction manual with all the technical details and functions of the Baldr Pro R. Behind the instructions is the Picatinny rail section and the tool to adjust the zero of the laser. And you'll see the same thing in all the Olight products. Just make sure to use the 1913 rail adapter if you're using anything besides a Glock. Here are those tech specs if you're curious on runtime also. The light has a high mode where it steps down from 1350 lumens over time, and then the low mode with a constant 300 lumens. And because none of us actually read the instructions, I'm going to say it one more time. The Lockout Mode, again, make sure to press both buttons for 2 seconds to fully enable the Baldr Pro R. Somebody out there is going to say, my light doesn't work right. Just watch for it in the comments. Trust me, it's going to happen. All right, though, let's look at the actual light housing. Taking the R out of the plastic wrap, I instantly see a very similar form factor to the Surefire x300. And as that's the standard for so many Safariland holsters, that could be a pretty big win, but we'll test all that out. Looking over the Baldr Pro R, we see the same QD locking lever as seen on the Pro. There's no way to adjust it though. So it really only fits on full size or compact pistols, as I found the subcompacts just don't have enough room on the rail or in the grip to make the thing fit in there. The Baldr Pro could also be used on a full-size rifle if you connected the QD into a Picatinny rail, and that's kind of the setup I use on my Strybog, as I think it works really great on a PCC. Apparently you can also connect in their magnetic touchpad into this light also, but I don't really like that touchpad. Here is also the GL rail segment to identify its setup to fit a Glock. Moving to the side of the light, we see the side buttons on either side that are activated by depressing inward. And this really isn't my favorite light activation method, as I have to come down and around and then back in instead of just being able to go straight down to activate the light. But I also just complain a lot. Next, we see exactly what I thought. The R stands for rechargeable, so there is no longer a battery component. I really like being able to just recharge the system with the included magnetic charger. Toting this big thing of batteries around is far more annoying than you would think. So you could use the magnetic charger, or you could use the touchpad that's sold separately that I mentioned hating. Seriously, this is way too big to be useful. We also see that the laser has been integrated into the housing, with the toggle switch removed, and the light instead uses a rotatable head on the front of the light to change modes like we saw on the Odin IR. The removal of the little laser nubbin is gonna make this light fit an absolute ton more holsters. All right, let's look at the functionality of it. The Baldr Pro has 3 different modes that can be used at 2 different white light intensity levels. Sliding the head over to the laser mode, we see the laser only mode, which has a nice bright green laser. And no, you can't click the buttons to change the laser light intensity. I don't know, that would be pretty cool though. Rotating the selector over, we swap to the light and laser mode. Clicking the side buttons turns on the light with the green laser in the center. Oops, almost forgot to mention it. There are also 2 little holes in the housing to adjust the actual laser, one for windage and then one for elevation. Then we swap the selector over to the light only mode. And in any of the white light modes, you can click the button on the side 2 times to quickly swap between low or high light mode. You can also click both buttons together to enable the strobe mode. Again though, it makes for kind of an awkward activation, as I can barely reach the buttons when I actually have a proper grip. But let's compare it side by side to the Baldr Pro and see what differences we can spot. As we saw previously, the Baldr Pro has the laser assembly outside of the light, which makes finding holsters problematic. There is also a switch at the bottom to select modes, but this can easily be bumped and just wasn't ideal at all. Looking at the Baldr Pro R, we see the removal of that laser, nubbin? What is it? For a much more streamlined design, with the switch also being removed and integrated into the head of the light. One big shift on the Baldr Pro R though is that the R is significantly longer than the Baldr Pro. And it's almost the exact same profile as a Surefire X300, but let's test some holsters. So the first one we'll test is the actual Baldr Pro profile holsters. Here's the holster from Makinatech that fits our Baldr Pro nicely. Swapping over to the Baldr Pro R, we see it doesn't fit at all. So be aware that the Baldr Pro R doesn't fit the Baldr Pro holster profiles, but I don't really care because that's a pretty hard holster profile to find, but I think it fits something way cooler. Let's test it. Here we have a Safariland holster designed to fit a Surefire X300. I'm betting this is exactly what they were going for. And yep, this holster fits absolutely perfectly. I like this a lot better than the Baldr Pro profile, to be honest. That Surefire X300 design is pretty dated if you ask me, but it opens up the door to so many holsters because that's just the de facto standard that so many use. All right though, let's go outside and test some of the functionality of the light, see how it performs out in the dark, and then I want to compare it against some of the other lights that I have. First off, I'll show you just the light function. The Baldr Pro R has a nice light throw in the 1350 lumen mode that lights up the entire yard nicely. This would be way too bright indoors, so it's nice to be able to flip over to the low light mode with a quick double click. Flipping over to the laser mode, the laser is clear and easy to see, and the light and laser mode give you illumination with a nice laser in the center. And some people may not like the idea of a laser, but I really like having like a 3 to 5 yard zero that just takes into account that height over bore, and then have my actual irons or my red dot set out at my normal zero. So I find it to be pretty useful. All right, though, let's compare the actual lights side by side against the Baldr Pro. I found the Baldr Pro R on the left was just the tiniest bit brighter than the Baldr Pro on the right. But the Baldr R was a more white light than the Baldr Pro. In the low power mode, they looked almost identical. I did note that the cone of the Baldr Pro R was just a little bit larger. Now those super wizards out there may already be commenting that that yellow hue may actually be better for cutting into lights that may be facing you. I think that's how it works. I don't know. I have full faith you'll just fully rage out in the comments. Let's do some more comparisons though. Let's take it out and put the Baldr Pro R against the Streamlight TLR7A and the TLR9. Here we keep the Baldr Pro R on the left, and we'll start with the TLR7A on the right. The 7A by Streamlight looked almost identical to the Baldr Pro R low mode in terms of light output and cone. The 7A did have a slightly more yellow hue, but only barely. Turning on high mode on the Baldr Pro R, we see a significant increase in light output from the Baldr. And then we'll swap out the TLR7A for the big brother on the Streamlight TLR9. Here, the TLR9 has a more concentrated beam with little to no spillover. The Baldr Pro R is a brighter shade of white with very similar cone size, but more bleed over that made me able to see more of the entire yard. And Olight does sometimes get a lot of grief, but seeing these side-by-side comparisons, I think you can make some decisions on your own. But Olight does say that this can also be a weapon-mounted light on a rifle, so let's compare to some of the big boys. On the right now is the Odin IR I showed you earlier with the 1000 lumen and 400 meter throw. The Odin has a far more concentrated cone with a good bit of spill to give some additional peripheral view. The low mode on the R is significantly dimmer with a larger cone but less spill. But what about one of the really big kid lights? Let's compare it against the Cloud Defensive Rein. Here again we have the Baldr Pro R on the left and our Cloud Defensive Rein on the right. Again we see that concentrated beam like on the Odin, but in a much warmer color to cut through oncoming light. Similar to the Odin comparison, the Baldr Pro S has a larger cone to brighten a larger area with less overall spill. So you'll have to sort out if you want a large cone or a concentrated cone based on what you're doing, as there's certainly a give and take for each. But tell you what, let's do a pros, cons, and if I recommend it. So the first pro is having that actual laser integrated into the light with the selector on the front of the light housing. The integrated laser into the light head means the laser itself is closer to the bore, so you get less movement of the laser as the distance changes. This is also a great option to set that super close zero, so you can have both the zero of your optic while also having a zero to account for your height over bore at close distances like 3 or 5 yards. Being able to swap modes at the front of the light gives me a way to know my mode just by feel and change it easily, without having to worry about that light selection being bumped accidentally and then I'm just randomly in the laser mode. Alright though, so my next pro is that x300 holster profile. One of my biggest issues with the Baldr Pro was that, are we calling it a nubbin? It's a nubbin that makes finding holsters so difficult. It's nice to see Olight going for a more familiar holster profile with the x300 form factor. This really opens the door for a lot of standard sizes and Safariland holster models, even though I think the x300 looks absolutely ridiculous. But let's go on to the next pro, and that's going to be the high and low light modes. This function is rare, and almost none of the lights we showed had this feature. If you go outside or inside, you're in just full blast mode. The Baldr Pro R allows you to swap modes to a lower light mode when you're indoors or have tight quarters with light bouncing around everywhere. But most of you are far more interested in blinding the hell out of yourself than actually engaging a target. But let's look at the next pro, and it's a huge one. It's rechargeable. I love not having to carry around a sea of batteries in my bags and pockets. This is one of the best upgrades, and it's a feature that other lights in its class just don't have. The convenience of this recharging method is just insane to me. It's absolutely great. So let's look at the cons then. And the first one, yeah, them side buttons. Having the buttons on the side makes for a significantly challenging activation method. It just doesn't feel natural and makes for an overall clunky operation. Pushing the two buttons for strobe is cool, I guess, but I'd never actually do that. It's just too much hand manipulation to activate. And then if I spent the time to do the hand manipulations to turn it on, then it would stay on until I did all that again to try to turn it off. Anyway, let's look at the next con, and that's that the actual QD mount isn't adjustable at all. With so much innovation on the Baldr S, this light frustrates me as I'm locked into the grip that the Baldr Pro fits and removed from the ones that it doesn't. The lack of any mount adjustment limits me to full-size or compact grips only. And it just looks a little bit ridiculous. So then, do I recommend it? And wow, this is hard because it is a big upgrade from the Baldr Pro, and it does have the x300 holster profile. But this x300 profile just seems dated. So I'll say this. If you're trying to get a light that's going to fit into an x300 holster profile, then yes, I do recommend it. Otherwise though, no. And I say that because the Baldr S does everything the Baldr Pro R does, but does it in a smaller form factor with an adjustable QD system that fits on anything and a button switch system that is far superior. The Baldr S really is king for me, as I could put it on just about anything. But remember, whatever light you're looking at, make sure to keep an eye out for those flash sales. And I'll put a link down in the description, like I said earlier, and make sure to use discount code TLDCO if you're going to purchase some lights. And I will say the Baldr lineup is my favorite family of weapon lights currently, as it allows me to have that close range 0 on the laser and a longer range 0 on my optics or iron. And if you don't like the laser, you can just turn it off. Well, I hope my review of the Olight Baldr Pro R was useful in your purchasing decisions. I want to say thanks to all of our Patreon supporters. You're the amazing people that help to make all this possible, and I love you for it. I want to say thanks to everybody that likes, comments, and subscribes. Comment down below what your favorite Baldr light is in the Baldr family. Geez, if I can get that out. All right, everyone, wash out. Oh, this touchpad. Just imagine the possibilities. Good Lord.